Good evening, everyone. I think it's evening now. My name is Brad Deane. I'm the manager of film programs at TIFF by Lightbox, and I'm also the lead programmer for the TIFF Cinematheque selection here at the festival. And I would like to welcome you all to this master class with Olivier Assayas. Now, I assume everyone in here probably knows Olivier's work, but if not, I'll give you a little brief intro. He has worked as a film critic, a screenwriter. He's been making films for more than 25 years now, including Le Foie, Irma Vep, Clean, Demon Lover, Summer Hours, and Carlos. He is here with his new film at the festival, Something in the Air, Après Mai, and it was just awarded the Best Screenplay at the Venice Film Festival. And we're very grateful to have him here with us, so please welcome Olivier Assayas. So I'd like to start with maybe before your career in film, or more in your youth, and what led you into filmmaking? Your father was a screenwriter, but your path to filmmaking was not necessarily a direct path.
No. No, it was not the direct path at all, actually. I guess that my new film, Something in the Air, gives a few hints at what my path actually was. It's, you know, my father was already an old man when I became a young adult, and for some reason, you know, I started painting very young, and between the age of, I don't know, something like 15 to 25, painting, drawing was a big part of my life, and somehow it was my first experience of expressing myself through art, and it has been something really defining in terms of my approach of cinema. And I don't know why, I mean, but I've always wanted to become a filmmaker, even though I had no idea what directing film was about, and I had no idea how to get there. It possibly has to do with the fact that my father, being a screenwriter, he had directed a couple of films also in South America, as it happens. Cinema was never completely alien. I mean, you know, I loved movies, I loved watching movies, but I kind of had the notion that because my father was in movies, were not like a world away, that it was not out of reach. But when I started really getting nearer to a point where I would have to make decisions, choices, I realized that, you know, I was doing summer jobs as a trainee on various old school type of movies. I realized that was not the way I wanted to approach cinema. That ultimately there was more that connected me to cinema through my painting than the odd jobs I would be doing thanks to my father, and I gradually discovered, thanks to my late friend Laurent Perrin, who had already started very young to shoot like Super 8 movies, that you could actually get hold of the tools and start, you know, shooting your own 16mm films. As amateurish as they may be, at least they taught you a few things about how to approach cinema. And so as much as I learned things, you know, being a trainee on movies here and there, I think I learned what cinema was about, what art was about, what the movies I would be making were about, making my own films my own way. And in a very naive way, you know, because I never went to film school. I studied French literature. I studied painting at the Beaux-Arts in Paris, but never cinema. So to me, film school were the short films I made, and they were fairly naive. You know, I'm always a little embarrassed now when I show them, because they are like school essays. You know, they are like at the French film school, the FEMIS, when the students get into the school, basically the teachers give them each a camera and say, you know, shoot whatever you want, so you get rid of your bad ideas. So, you know, that's what my short films were about.
And then maybe talk a little bit about influence. I know you've cited two people actually as major influences on you, Robert Bresson and Guy Debord. Maybe you can talk about how they've influenced you.
Yeah, well, that's I'll try to keep it short, but it's a big chapter. Like so many movie lovers from my generation, discovering the work of Robert Bresson has been a defining moment. I mean, as much as I loved movies, as much as I was fascinated with movies, when I saw the films of Robert Bresson, and I think I discovered them on TV. I mean, you know, I watched A Man Escaped, like when you know, on French TV. It just was different. It was something else, and it was just like beyond movies. It was, and when I discovered Pickpocket, those movies, it was just all of a sudden they gave you a sense as a young man that movies were that through movies you could go beyond movies. That that the movies of Bresson, by any standards, were some of the greatest art produced in the 20th century. So it was not like a question of evaluating movies in respect to painting or novels. I mean, you know, just the films of Bresson were on a higher plane. I mean, they just for me belong to the highest forms of human expression, and if movies could go that far, if movies could reach that far, then it was a form of art that was worth dedicating your life to exploring. So obviously the other filmmaker that made me feel similar emotions is Andrei Tarkovsky. As for Guy Debord is a more complex and difficult chapter, and it's a different question. I suppose that I survived the 70s. I managed to survive the dead ends of French leftism of that era, thanks to Guy Debord, because Guy Debord was like possibly one of the most important writers and thinker of post-war France, and certainly gave mostly through his book Society of the Spectacle, but also through his work publishing the International Situations magazine. He gave reading of the modern world, the reading of the evolution of contemporary societies, for those of you not acquainted to his writing, let's say that it's somewhere in the area of the social criticism of the School of Frankfurt, and it's certainly structured my worldview at a very young age, and has been a huge influence on my cinema and my life, I would say.
Okay, and then I believe you made at least some short films, and then you went to write as a film critic for Cahiers du Cinéma. Can you maybe talk about how that...
That happened... I made a first short film in an ambient of French post-punk scene. I mean, we're talking about the late 1970s, and I was involved with. I mean, my friends were more often part of the music scene than of the movie scene that was a little boring and dull at the time in France, at least for my taste. I mean, there was not a young filmmaking scene that was really exciting, whereas the music scene was like really exciting. That's where it was happening. That's where things were alive and changing. So, I was part of that whole scene, and I was one of the. I mean, I was the guy who was making short films. I mean, who wanted to become a filmmaker, and I made one. I haven't watched it since, but I think very bad short film, whose one redeeming value was that I asked a guy called Jacques No, who was the lead guitarist for a band called the Stinky Toys, French punk rock band, to write the score, and it became an instant hit. It was just like huge, like he published a record with the score, and the score became an instant hit. I mean, no one knew about the short film, and luckily for me, I should add, but at least everybody, all of a sudden, everybody knew the score, and. For some reason, Serge Danet and Serge Toubiana, who were the chief editors of Cahiers du Cinéma, watched that film and they kind of liked it. I mean, it just gave them a sense that it was something new coming from a different place, which was at least the best way to approach it. And they programmed it at some Cahiers du Cinéma Presents program. I met them. And at that point, and they told me, well, do you read the Cahiers du Cinéma? I said, no, I don't read Cahiers du Cinéma because Cahiers du Cinéma don't write about movies. And he said, yeah, but this has, I mean, and indeed, they had been involved for almost a decade with politics. I felt extremely alien to, I mean, because it was mostly totalitarian, pro-Maoist or whatever junk. And so I had very. I mean, I admired the history of Cahiers du Cinéma because I admired Jean-Luc Godard and I admired François Truffaut and the writing of André Bazin. But that was from another era. The way the Cahiers had evolved was completely alien to any of my tastes in politics and films. And but. Basically, what Serge Danet and Serge Toubiana told me is that the magazine was changing. They wanted to reconnect with filmmaking. They wanted to open the magazine to new writers, to young writers. Would I be interested in contributing? And at that stage in my life, at that stage in my career, I felt completely immature. I felt, I had this very naive approach to painting, this naive approach to creation in general, making my short films I was not so happy with. I felt I had a lot to learn. I felt I had to structure my approach to cinema, and because Cahiers had been historically edited by would-be filmmakers, I felt, I've never wanted to become a film critic in my life. I've always imagined myself as a would-be filmmaker. Cahiers was the one place where I could try and write some film criticism because great filmmakers had done that before me. So I had a shot at it. I wrote some very short reviews of not very interesting movies. I mean, it just was kind of safe ground, and very shyly I brought them to Serge and Serge, and they said, oh, okay, well, we'll publish those 2 pieces, and try something a little bit more ambitious next time. And so that's how I became a writer, and ultimately I ended up staying 5 years. I wrote a lot of film journalism, film criticism, and film theory. Ultimately, it's the film theory that somehow sticks. It's the stuff that I kind of much later gathered in one book of my writing.
And I mean, what do you think the role of a film critic should be today? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a different time. It's a different era. I mean, the way I've seen things, I mean, I have no big theory about it, but the way I would like condense my view of film criticism is that the issue is who you are writing for. I think that some critics write for the audience, but they end up writing type consumer advice type criticism, meaning, you know, this is good for you, this is not good for you, I give it 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, you know, 1 square, 2 squares, black dot, whatever, you know, and it's to me it's horrible. It's what I dislike the most about modern film criticism. Then you have film criticism that has some kind of dialogue with the filmmakers. That kind of tries to find the ground on which it can exchange something with the filmmakers. That's obviously the most interesting the form of writing. I think film criticism is about having a dialogue with the artist, a creative dialogue with the artist, trying to figure out the zeitgeist, trying to put the movies in the context of the zeitgeist and trying to push the artists to go eventually further in their work. But now I think there's another form of film criticism which is about writing for fellow critics, and I think that's what the plague of modern film criticism.
Okay, maybe we'll get back to your films now and jump ahead a little bit to Le Foie, which is a film that I think you've said was a bit of a break for you in the way you'd worked before. Can you talk about the experience of working on that film and how it shaped your films afterwards?
L'eau froide, Cold Water is my 5th film. And yes, it's a major change. It's a major change coming at the right moment for me. It's like I felt I had gone all the way in my initial original approach of cinema and felt its limits. And I just needed to go beyond. I had no idea how. It comes after my 4th feature, which was a movie called Une Nouvelle Vie, which I shot in CinemaScope. It was a very abstract film, very dark. Very dark and violent in its own way, and eventually confused, and which says a lot about the place I was at in terms of my life and my art. But at least it was a very, you know, it was. I felt I was just shaking up the texture of my films, taking risks, but taking the wrong risks in retrospect. But what was the worst part of the experience of making that film was the weight of the camera. Because CinemaScope, very little focus, very little profondeur de champ, depth of field, sorry, very little depth of field, hours to set up very complex shot. I mean, just the weight of the technique of cinema was just unbearable. I just got to a point, I just hated it. Could not stand it anymore, and I had to invent a different way to make movies for myself, which came through this movie that was initially commissioned by TV. I mean, it was not like any kind of heavy-handed thing. I mean, they asked me if I wanted to make a 45-minute film in the context of a series of similar films made by French directors of various generations. So, like, you know, they asked 10 filmmakers to make a movie about their teenage years and the kind of music they were listening at the time. And I kind of grabbed the opportunity. I said, give me the same budget. I won't do a 45-minute film. I will make an experimental 90-minute film, and then I will cut a shorter version of 45 minutes that will be perfect for the small screen. So it was a completely experimental way of making films. It was for the first time I functioned with a small 16mm handheld camera, much lighter. There was not this issue of weight anymore. Only kids, meaning no hair, no makeup. They got dressed by themselves. No rehearsal, anything. I mean, just keep it completely natural, completely spontaneous, and we shot in 24 days, which is really very little, less than 24. But beyond the technical aspect of it, the door it opened for me was also the door of autobiography. Cold Water is not an autobiographical film the way a movie like Something in the Air is an autobiographical film. But it's for the first time I had the opportunity to deal in a very literal fashion with actual events from my own life, and all of a sudden it just, I mean, I don't know. I would not have dared to go in that place on my own. But the fact that it was part of the commission, why not? I mean, it kind of gave me a carte blanche, to go that route, and all of a sudden it opened up new ways of thinking, new ways of making movies, a new approach also to acting, and then basically it made me a very different filmmaker. I mean, it's like a second chapter in my work.
And I think your cinematographer Deane Lenoir talked about the actual way you would set up shots changed in that film too, with the much longer takes. Can you talk about
much longer takes, and also the thing that I just hated when we were doing a Nouvelle Vie because of all those depth field problems. I mean, we had marks on the floor everywhere. Like actors would move from one cross on the floor to another cross on the floor to a third cross on the floor. And after that film, I just decided I just don't want to see any mark on the floor on any of my film ever in my life. So that was the approach to Cold Water.
And I guess one of the things that's most striking about all of your films, I think, is that the way you use music in your films. And you use it in so many different ways. I think in Something in the Air, well, an example of one way you use it in Something in the Air is you'll use a song over that doesn't come from the source, but you'll use it over a scene, or sometimes to bridge a few scenes together into a sequence. In Le Foie, you use it, I think, almost primarily as source.
It's only source.
Yeah, and then in, I believe it's in Irma, you use Bonnie and Clyde in the party as a source, but then it bridges over into the following scene. And then one of the ones I find really striking is actually in Carlos, because I believe it's the Feelies, Loveless Love, when you introduce Carlos. And it's not a very well-known song, but it almost feels as though it could be a score for that whole sequence to introduce him. Can you talk about the different ways?
I've always had a difficult relationship with scoring my films. I started as many filmmakers in a very naive way. Like my first feature, there was a line that said, in the budget, that said, score. So we hired someone to write a score, and he gave us his music, and we put it in the film. Gabriel Yared, he's a great musician, by the way. But I had no clear notion of what film music was about, except the fact that in movies you have music. But it was not clearer than that for me. That if you did not have music in your film, it didn't feel like a movie or something, which was the worst possible reason. And so in my first film, Désordre, you have the two dimensions. You have the score written by Gabriel Yared on one side, and then you have the songs. I mean, because it's a movie about the indie rock scene of the 80s, and there's a lot of the stuff I was listening at the time, which in many ways was much more connected to the way I've been using music since. I started having problems with music when I made my second film, Winter Child, where I had a score written also again by a very good musician, Jorge Arriagada, who's a Chilean who wrote a lot of very good music for Raúl Ruiz. After I finished the film, I just felt horribly bad about the score. I felt, because it was a melodrama, it was kind of a modern melodrama, but still it had a melodramatic structure. And using melodramatic music in a melodrama, it just felt overstated. It felt wrong. It felt fake. And to this point, I haven't really reconciled with the way I used the music on that film. So the next step. Sorry, but it has to be a long answer because it's a fairly complex issue for me. On my third film, my approach was say, okay, now I'm going to use the music from a musician I admire. So I will call John Cale. I mean, I've been listening to his records. I mean, we're not just talking about the Velvet Underground album. I mean, I just loved his whole solo career, and especially one music of orchestral music he published very early called The Academy in Peril. And I thought, I love the music in The Academy in Peril. Why not ask John Cale to score my film? And he wrote a score. Which I liked, which was contrapunctual. I mean, it was just not. It was it was not underlying the dramatic elements. It was in some other place. I was using it not exactly in places you use music normally, and so on and so forth. But still, it still had this quartet format, and which ends up being the most conventional form of film score. So again, I did not use much of his music in the film, but I was not so glad, not so satisfied with the outcome. So the next film I decided to completely cut, to have like no music at all. So Une Nouvelle Vie has like no music. It's just like not even source music. And after that film, starting from L'Eau Froide, I started very shyly, very gradually using music again, only as source music. And I never really worked with a musician again. The only actual score written for any of my films ever since is for Demon Lover, when I worked with Sonic Youth. But it was a completely different approach. I mean, for me, it was a completely different film, and I just wanted to try new things. So I decided that the film needed a score, but a very specific score, meaning something that would be halfway between noise and music, something that would mingle with the sound design, where there would be really no difference between the actual score and the sound design, meaning that the Sonic Youth sent me also sounds. They send me stuff. I mean, they were, recordings they did of just noises in the street or something, which everything was treated on a similar level and then ended up mixed in the final film. But I don't want to go too far away in terms of just a technique, but the very interesting aspect of it was that they were working on Pro Tools, which is like the sound machines that musicians use, and which is also the sound machine sound designers in film use. So it's they sent us their music in the form of Pro Tools sessions that we could just import in our own sound design, and meaning we had access to every single layer of the music, and we could remix every single layer of their music to integrate it ourselves in any way we considered fit, you know, in the soundtrack of the film. So it was a very, very special approach to using music, and it was. I never did it again since, but I loved the experience, and I'm just very happy with the job they did.
And was Sonic Youth at all involved in that?
They were involved in. So we. The idea is that I sent them the screenplay, and they wrote material based on the screenplay, which they sent us and which I gave to the crew and to the actors. I mean, they gave, you know, we had CDs, and it was not MP3 at that point. And then when we started shooting, we would send them every week a DVD with one take of every shot almost. So and they would send us stuff back. And it was like back and forth. And once the movie was finished, we went to the studio, which was still in Murray Street at that point, and we worked with them on the images to add things, which we kept or not in the final mix. But they were they were really organically involved in the process.
And I think now maybe we'll jump ahead to your new film, Something in the Air. When I first heard about this film, I think last January, it was described to me as a cross between Lo Froid and Carlos, which I think is actually a really great description. I think it's the subject matter in a way of a very of a young filmmaker, someone just starting out in a way, and it's very personal, and yet it has, you know, a technical mastery, I think, of a film like Carlos. I guess my question is, why make this story right now?
Well, you make movies for various reasons. I mean, they are at the crossroads of so many things. I've wanted to do. I had wanted to do this film for ages. Basically, since I had made Cold Water, because it's when I made Cold Water, I made it really fast. Without being so conscious of what was going on. I mean, you know, it was just, to me, it was just like a small film I was doing like that. And when in reality it was much more important and really something that had a very lasting effect on my work. So when I had finished the film, I knew that it was like the abstract, poetic version of that period of my life. But somehow there was much more to it. I mean, there is a lot of what I would have loved to say or to describe of the 1970s that did not really make its way into the film, because it was, you know, it was a short film, and we did not even have the kind of budget that would have allowed us to go as far as I would have loved to go. So I always had in the back of my mind that L'eau froide kind of asked for some kind of companion piece. I was not sure where it would take me, but I was sure I was not finished with the 1970s. But then it always felt a little early to do that. Also because the problem of such a film is also a financial problem, because it's a period piece. It involves recreating the 1970s. It involves, you know, sets, clothes, whatever, and of course there would be no movie stars. It's all kids. So it's just it's kind of a difficult commercial proposition in terms of getting this off the ground, so you know, I had this problem was always in the back of my mind. And then when I did Carlos, I made a movie about the 1970s, but from a completely different perspective. It was like the big picture. It was not seen from Paris. It was seen from the point of view of global geopolitics, of inscribing what was happening in Western societies in the 1970s in the framework of the Cold War. I mean, and history with the big H. So once I was done with Carlos, I had a sense that I kind of needed to go back to that time to show not so much the bigger picture, but to show the small picture. I mean, the small picture of an individual myself, immersed into the chaos of those years, into the turmoil of a world that was literally upside down, and a movie where I would describe my own path, the way I survived the 1970s in a way, and from a very intimate perspective, but an intimate perspective which is also the intimate perspective of my generation, and I had a sense that as much as there had been, well, there's been very few movies made about that period in time, and a movie like Carlos, meaning dealing with the issues Carlos deals with, had never been made, but a movie in the first person about the counterculture, about the leftist politics of the time had never been made neither. So I thought there was I thought there was a virgin ground, and I felt also that I had learned a lot making Carlos, which made it a lot easier in terms of recreating the 70s, which made it a lot easier for me to approach a film like what became Something in the Air.
And I think one of the most interesting things for me is the way you don't romanticize the era at all. Yeah. Can you talk about the way politics function in the film?
Well, the 1970s have been simultaneously ridiculed and fantasized, and both are wrong. Both are very wrong. I mean, because they were not ridiculed. They were crazy. They were excessive. But it involved life and death issues for the individuals. I mean, people experimented the craziest ways that had been opened up by the revolutions of the 60s. They experimented whatever became the future, but it was like a laboratory of the future. Everything in the 70s, it's like all the barriers had been broken down. There was nothing really solid in society that you could lean on. There were no values that of societies of that time, of the society of that time, that could be shared by the youth of the era. Everything had to be questioned. Everything had to be reinvented. But it was extraordinary. It was unique. I mean, there has never been a time like this before or after. But it was also very scary. My generation, I mean, kids of my generation, ultimately have sacrificed so much. They dropped out of school. They cut ties with their family. They did not care about any kind about learning any kind of job. They did not really raise families until fairly late. They were the foot soldiers of the social war going on, and lots of casualties. So what I am trying to describe in the film is both the political side of it and the countercultural side of it. What we lose in our memory, I mean, in the way the 1970s are represented, is the contradictions. It's the complexities and the contradiction. Meaning, I don't know what was the balance in the mix here in North America in general. The balance in the mix in France in terms of the politics on one side and the counterculture on the other was 75% in favor of the politics and 25% in favor of the counterculture. And it was two ambients that were extremely suspicious of one another. I mean, like leftists, Trotskyists, organized Trotskyists, Maoists, were concerned with connecting with the working class. And whatever had to do with the counterculture was considered petit bourgeois, was considered something that could not be understood or accepted by the working class. So, you know, pop music was out, drugs were out, free press was out, poetry, painting, art, movies, all that was suspicious. All that was considered as, again, things that were not part of what would lead us to the obviously forthcoming revolution. But then, when you were a kid in the 70s, you did not understand. I mean, what the contradiction was. Where were the contradictions? I mean, you know, you had to be attracted by the radical politics, because everybody believed in the revolution. Everybody believed that the revolution was round the corner, and everybody, in a way or another, wanted to be part of it, because it was a revolution, but it was also the youth's revolution. But then on the other side, you know, sorry, what's wrong with rock and roll? I mean, what's wrong with drugs? What's wrong with you know, the freedom, the invention, the excitement of what was happening artistically in that scene, and you know, free press painting, you know, psychedelic painting, whatever, you know. So we were stuck in something in the middle of a conflict we were not so concerned with. And it was, in that sense, it was very difficult to find your place in the middle, especially in a context where the politics were, to my taste, more and more misguided. Where you know, the politics were becoming more and more dogmatic, scary, where radicalizing meant to come closer and closer to supporting or the whatever was going on in China at the time, which you know, which was disaster on a demented level. The Cultural Revolution was just you know, a drama on an extraordinary scale that the Western kids did not understand. I mean, you know, it's scary in retrospect to imagine that you had youth in Western cultures who were really supporting mass repression, mass destruction, mass murder on the level of what was happening at that time in China. So, you know, something was rotten in the whole process. And so many kids were just, you know, not aware, because it was just too difficult, too far away, and they were just dramatically misinformed.
I mean, I think the kids in the film, especially, I think, are also very memorable, and most of them are non-professionals, I believe. Lola, of course,
except Lola, who's a seasoned professional. Yes.
Yeah. And so, how did you go about casting the film?
I was not looking for actors. I wanted to find kids who had something of the energies of the 70s, who were unlike the other kids today. I mean, I interviewed a lot of young boys and girls, and obviously, the one that stood out were the ones who were creative in a way or another. Ultimately, I realized that I was looking more for artists than for actors. Also, because I think that I was aware that they would not understand much of the actual politics of the 1970s, because those politics are really arcane. I mean, it's really stuff that you know, it's really hard to even have a grasp of what was going on in terms of the political debate of those years. So, you know, that would be very but at least they would be able to understand the creative process. They would be able to understand what it means to try to find your own way, simultaneously being part of your generation, but also being somewhere else on your own, trying to figure out your own path. And all of the kids in the film more or less understood that, had a sense of that. And they all had this kind of originality, singularity of being, which really make them different, marginal in their own way, in the context of their own generation.
Okay. And I think I'd like to open up to the audience in just a minute, but before that, I had one more question. And it just goes up. It's actually something that's from one of your earlier films. It's from late August, early September, where one of the characters in the film asks, "Can stories describe the world?" And I want to know what you think about that statement.
Well, it's obviously about well, it's an actual question. It's an actual question. It's really storytelling is always a simplification of the world, and the same question could be asked about traditional politics. I mean, you know, just can traditional politics make sense of the world as it is? The same way as do the stories we tell, meaning in any kind, in terms of the classic dramaturgics, the classic narration, is it up to the challenge of dealing with the complexities of the modern world? I mean, it's. I think it's always the most daring, the craziest forms of narration that, in a way or another, manage to grasp a world that is so becoming so complex and so abstract in many ways. But I mean, when I was also answering about politics, it obviously has to do with the way, with the difference between how politics were approached in the 1970s and the way politics are approached now. The politics of the 1970s were crazy, but at least they were politics where some notion of the future was involved. You know, I mean, just people had crazy ideas about the coming revolution, but at least they trusted the future. They believed there was a future worth fighting for. And it was today. The scary thing today is that just people are bombarded with this notion that it's impossible to have any kind of effect, to have any kind of grasp on the future, on what society. I mean, you know, you have politicians every single day, all year round, explaining to you on TV that the problem is this, the problem is that, and we can't deal with it. You know, it's the crisis, it's the global warming, it's the economy, yeah, I mean, we're trying really hard, but we really don't know how it works, and we don't know how it works to have any kind of effect on it. So, you know, the media is constantly exhibiting this impotence of politics to deal with the serious issues of today. So, you know, you're a kid. I mean, how are you going to have a grasp if those guys don't have any grasp? So it's very it's extremely sad and depressing, because the reality is that we have always in our hands the possibility of changing the world, because it's about faith. Faith is enough. I mean, you know, it's. You know, like I admire so much, like those Pussy Riot girls in Russia. It's in, you know, it's five girls playing music are enough just to make Vladimir Putin scared. So, you know, it does mean something. You know, it just gives a little bit of hope, because it just gives a cue to what could be possible, should be possible.
Okay, and now we'd like to open up for questions in the audience. So if you just raise your hand, there's a microphone, and we can pass it around. No questions. I can ask some more questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
It's just a light question, a technical question about something in the air. I was struck by the the beauty of the cinematography, the choreography of the cinematography. I was curious to see what's your relationship. Obviously, you have an amazing relationship with your cinematographer, and it's so seamless, but yet it's so choreographed, and it's so naturally beautiful that it's. I don't know. I would love to hear your process in blocking the scene. And your work with the cinematographer, and how you managed to choreograph in such an amazing, seamless way.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, it has to do.
Sorry. Congratulations on your award.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, no, it's. I have a very close relationship with Eric Gauthier, who's the cameraman. I mean, but he's not the only cameraman. Actually, I work with 3 cameramen depending on the project. One is Denis Lenoir. I started with him. The other one is Yorick Le Sceau, but Eric Gauthier has been involved in 5 or 6 of my films, and you know, the first one being Guillermo Vep. Eric is brilliant, and you know, he brings so much to the film. I mean, the way we function is I design the shots. I mean, I describe them fairly precisely, but I only do that in the morning before the shoot, because I really believe that you should keep in touch with the evolution of the film. Meaning, you can't do that before you start making the film, because when you start the film, you would. You basically don't know what the film will look like. You don't know where the film will take you. So it's like I think it's a process that evolves like day after day. So I just design my shots like really last minute, because I have in mind everything I had done before, and so it's like walking step after step. And then I bring the shot. I explain the shots to Eric, and obviously we kind of adapt them together. And and usually we never really block them. We don't really block them, because we keep on searching. I mean, we try something and say, oh, why not go one step further? Why not change this? Why not change that? So ultimately, I mean, in a lot of the more, I mean, I'm not talking about the simpler shots, but in terms of the more complex shots, especially the ones that involve different, you know, extras, many many camera positions. It's we add layers, shot by shot, and in the end, the last take doesn't really look like the first one. And then when I'm editing, I end up using. Sometimes I use the whole shot and that's it. But sometimes I use moments from different takes, but in this film it was we had very few clear ideas when we approached the film. The one important element which came to me even when I was writing was the use of the crane. I had not used crane shots for a long time before this film. I really got to dislike them, and I did not think in terms of using cranes. But except in this film, I thought I thought there was something about some kind of pastoral lyricism that involved using the crane, but in landscapes, in the middle of nature, just to have this notion of a very light camera floating and watching the characters from afar, and it's we kind of stuck to it because it was like the only idea we had. So it's but it became an important element of the style of the film, and possibly it gave us the key also to the rest, and the fluidity also you were talking about. It's and it's also another stage in the way my style evolved. I mean, in the sense that for a long time I used really long lenses, abstract shots, a lot of long lens handheld camera, and at some point I felt it was all over the place, that everybody was doing that, and it was becoming very conventional and cliche, and I completely dropped it. I decided to use wider lenses, and I started looking much more at the sets, at light, nature, etc. And it's something that has been growing and evolving until something in the air.
I actually have a question related to that, even for on Carlos, because you use actually two cinematographers, yet visually, I mean, you really can't distinguish. How did that work? I mean, getting them to coordinate. To have such a
it's you know, Carlos was a very it was a huge project. It was the shoot was like months and months, and we were like in 9 different countries. It was like completely out of proportion. So a lot of the technicians, a lot of the crew. Had I mean, those guys have families, they have a life, and they kind of need. So we had like technicians coming back and forth. So we had the different. I think the only guy who did the whole shoot was the sound engineer Nicolas Quentin. But in all the other jobs, it was guys coming in and out. Oh, today it's oh, so it's him. Today it's some other guy, and that was part of the deal. I mean, from the start, everybody say, "Well, I will be doing the whole film, but sorry, I can't go to Lebanon. I can't spend 2 months in Lebanon at this point in my life." So so fair enough, So I but yes, in terms of the cameraman, I mean, it was. Well, it was a very simple issue. The thing is that I started the film with Yorick Le Sceau, and after at some point when we were still preparing the film, Yorick came to me and said, "Well, I have a problem. My wife is pregnant. She will have our first child, and the baby basically will be born when we are in Lebanon. I'm sorry, I can't deal with that, and so I will go this far, and beyond that, I just want to be with my wife," which was understandable, and so I called Deane Lenoir, who had done most of my early films and lives in the States now, works mostly in LA, and he came back and did the second part of the shoot. But it's I think the organic way I kind of function with my cameraman makes that there's not much difference. I mean, there's very few cameramen who understand how I function, but some would just not really feel at ease with that approach. But then when I work with Éric Gauthier, when I work with Yorick Le Sceau, with Denis Lenoir, it's pretty much the same process, and we end up in more or less the same place. I think to the credit, I mean, at least just the difference with Éric Gauthier is Éric has he spends more time in the lab. He just likes to get into tiny nuances of the image, and he's really a master at mixing. I mean, controlling stock and the way it's developed, on what kind of stock it's printed. It's a very so I let him do it. He does it on his own.
And okay, we'll go here and then over there next.
Your new book begins with an incredibly moving and personal letter to Alice Becker-Ho, and I really wanted to say thank you for bringing the ideas of the Situationist International back into our discourse, and also when you began to discuss, creating laboratories of the world, I wondered, it occurred to me to ask, have you ever played the game of war with Alice?
No, because I'm not good with board games in general. You know, and Alice is an expert on it, so I would not. I would no, but we've remained close friends ever since, and I was mostly involved in reviving the films of Guy Debord, and and restoring them, and just managing to solve a lot of the technical problems and legal problems involved. I was really happy we managed to publish a really satisfying DVD box set, DVD of the great work of Debord. And no, Alice has been a friend ever since, and she was in Venice at the screening of Something in the Air. So yeah, it's his family.
And I think we had over here.
Can you describe your relationship with producers, and then also how involved are they in the development process of your films?
I don't know if I'm difficult or not in terms of my relationship with producer. Sometimes I think the process is fairly simple, but I think sometimes it can turn into a nightmare for producers. So I kind of well, the thing is that basically I bring them a screenplay, and I don't touch that screenplay very much, really, after my first draft. It's not like there's 100 drafts adjusting this and that. I mean, I have a vision of the film with stuff that's obvious and stuff that's less obvious, and I never have any plan really of fixing what's not obvious, because I'm in the back of my mind I'm kind of convinced that maybe the most important element, the most important issues on the film are there. I mean, because they are stuff I can't really explain, that look a little digressive. I always have in the back of my mind the notion that maybe that's what's the most important and certainly worth protecting. I think that I've always had good relationships with my producers in the process of making the films, because I need to have, there has to be some kind of shared trust. I trust them, the film will happen, they will make the film happen, they will get the financing together, and they kind of trust me in just getting the film right. But the thing is that my movies are always like prototypes. I mean, they are never exactly like other movies, and they involve financial. I mean, they impose forms of creative financing. I mean, because they are hybrids often. I mean, like when I'm making a movie like Irma Vep, I mean, I'm doing it on a tiny scale. I mean, we did it for like no money at all. But then it's a crazy abstract film using a Chinese film star no one in France has heard of. How do you convince guys in TV executives, just to, or even, committees giving grants, that this is not just absurd. So you know, when I'm making a movie like Demon Lover, which we ended up making on a fairly decent budget, but it's just it's really complicated in terms of logistics. I mean, we shot in Mexico, we shot in we shot in Japan, we shot in obviously in France, but with the cast of with an international cast. I mean, those movies are really unlike regular French movies. So they involve difficulties no end. So sometimes the producer, they're happy to do it once, but they're not so much into doing it twice. Even if they're happy with the result.
Okay, and up front here.
So you were saying that you use the script as a first draft. So is that what you use as a tool to work with actors? So if you could talk about your work with actors, like for example in acclaimed with non-professionals and professionals, and I guess and the Lolas who are kind of in between, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, to me, the screenplay is part of the process. It's really like the process of inventing the film begins with the moment I just have the idea to make it, and it finishes when I have a finished print. I mean, and ultimately the process of reinventing it, questioning it, is constant. It really never stops. And so the screenplay is like a frozen moment in the evolution of the film, and I never consider it as more than that. It's because I need at some point to freeze the creative process, so I can start. The producer can start working on financing the film. We can start casting. We can start figuring out what locations we need, and so on and so forth. But the moment the screenplay is finished, it's already obsolete. Yeah, I'm already somewhere else, because the moment I start visiting locations, the moment I start meeting actors or non-actors, I'm already in a different place, because the actor is going to be obviously much more important than the character I have invented. I mean, you write a character, it's a simplification of the depiction of humanity. It's the moment the character becomes a movie character, becomes flesh and blood, it's through the body of the actor, and the presence of the body of the actors is so much more powerful than whatever I've written. So at that point, when the movie begins to take shape, when I begin to know the faces I will be filming, when I start visiting the places I will be filming, all of a sudden it becomes real in ways I had not anticipated in the screenplay, and it will encourage me to go, further and further. I've always repeated it, but it's the absolute truth. I don't consider I work with actors. I direct actors. I consider I work with actors. To me, the actors, when I give them the part, when I trust them with the part, know much more about the character than I do. And ultimately, I look at them to understand things about the characters I've written. I encourage them to. I never explain them anything. I don't lecture them on the part. I just don't discuss the psychology or whatever of the characters. It's there. It's rough. And basically it's up to you to fill it with something, to fill it with life, to fill it with your own ideas. And if you go in the wrong direction, I will help you. I will if for some reason I feel that what you are doing, you're doing is not doesn't fall into place, I will just gently push you a little bit on this side or that side, just to get you on the right track. But I never do much more than that. I don't speak with the actor. I don't explain. It can be frustrating for some actors, but I think it's the only way to keep some spontaneity and also some mystery to the performances. And I function absolutely the same way with actors and non-actors. I kind of approach, often I would work with guys who have never been in movies. I mean, in small, specifically in small parts. I mean, like I love the story, so I always come back to. I just love the story. I mean, when we were shooting Carlos, we had like 1 million parts in the film, and we were supposed to shoot. I mean, we hoped we would be able to shoot in Sudan the scenes that are supposed to take place in Sudan, and gradually we realized that we would never have the authorization to shoot in Sudan. So we said, oh, okay, so we will cast in Sudan and bring the Sudanese actors to Lebanon. So we sent a casting person in Khartoum who interviewed, just many Sudanese actors, brought us back the tapes. We chose the guys. I mean, it was very late in the process, so we were already shooting in Lebanon, so I had no time really to go to Khartoum. So we had to do it based on the tapes. So I cast the Sudanese part based on the tapes. Shooting goes on, and we get to the point when we were about to shoot the Sudanese scenes, and the Sudanese actors are supposed to come, and then we realized that for some reason the Sudanese government has decided that our film was anti-Sudanese or anti-Syrian specifically, who are allies of the Sudanese. And they decided that they would not let the actors out of Sudan, and we were like shooting the next day. So I had to recast all the characters, all the Sudanese actors with the Sudanese extras. We had a bunch of Sudanese extras just to have the background, and so they were the only Sudanese available, in Lebanon or something. So I started. So every single Sudanese part comes really from. I mean, there are guys who are like a driver, security, or the gas station attendant, So and I gave them all the parts. The only part I could not cast was the part of a gynecologist, because he was like a doctor. He had to look serious, and so until the sorry for the long story, but it's just a crazy story. It's so until the very morning of the day when we are supposed to shoot that scene between Carlos and the gynecologist, we do not have the actor. We have, and so it was getting scary, because I need the scene. I do need the scene. It's an important scene in the film, and basically I said, just get anybody. And at some point, and the wardrobe lady comes to me and says, my dentist, he's a really nice guy and he's really funny. I always tell him he should be in movies, and said, send me a photo, So somehow she manages to get a photo of the dentist, and sends the photo, which I get on my phone, and I look at the guy, and say, well, yeah, okay, sure, why not? It's here. And so we bring the dentist in the afternoon, and he's great. He played the part. He was perfect, and I directed him exactly the same way I direct any character and any actor. I told him, okay, do this, do that, and he was happy to do it, and he was extremely funny. And then and the whole scene is in the film, and everybody's I know no one realized there's a problem, so you can get away with a lot. Yeah.
Okay, another one right up front here.
Sure. Thank you. It sounds like, you're very comfortable with spontaneity, like it's, something that struck me with the first question was you said, well, that you normally don't go over the shoots or the shot list or whatever with the DP until the day, and to me that's almost antithesis to the way I think as a growing filmmaker. So I'm just curious, was it along your journey as a director, was it that you, in your earlier films, you planned it and then you found out, wait a minute, life doesn't work that way, and they just go, you know what, out to work on it? Or was it always that way? I mean, how did you
No,
get to that
no,
point?
no. It became that way. I mean, when you start making films, you want to be in control. You want to do things. You want to plan things and try to get things right, because you're also learning, and you're a little scared of going in areas where things just feel loose. I mean, you don't let your actors improvise that much, and at some point you feel more confident, and you have a sense of, why not try this, why not try that, why not open up, and why not, and now I really cherish the moments of improvisation, the moments where something happens that I had not planned. I just anything that happens on the set that I had not imagined, that I don't control, is always to me better than what I control. I mean, it's somehow it's the way life gets into the process, disturbs the process, and brings something that feels like a reality and not cinema.
But do the rest of the crew feel that way?
Well, the rest of the crew, they somehow, I need their help. I started what I started doing in Carlos, and which I kept on doing in Something in the Air, is just dropping the very notion of rehearsing. So I never rehearsed with my actors, but I used to do at least, I rehearsed the technical setup, the basics with the grip and the sound man. Now I don't even do that. So it involves a lot of risks for the crew. I mean, meaning for the focus puller, for the sound man, because he don't know exactly who is going to speak when. So it's just a matter of, it's difficult to put the boom in the right position. It's extremely difficult for the grip, because he has to understand the movement, which is often very complicated from my early basic descriptions. So it's and I'm doing usually fairly complex shots. So if you don't rehearse them, there's a certain degree of risk involved, which is a way of sharing with the actors the danger of filming. I mean, it's somehow the actors are exposed, but when you shoot this way, the technicians also are exposed. There's a certain amount of danger also for them, and that makes it gives a certain concentration on the set, which obviously translates into the images. Well, sometimes it fucks up completely, right? Just don't believe that you can absolutely get away with it every single time. Just don't try this at home.
Hi, I had a question. Can you hear me? Yes. I wanted to know how flexible your shooting schedule is, not in a film where you're traveling around the world, but are you always restricted by this 30-day?
Yes.
You are. Okay.
Yes. Sadly, I mean, I've never really been in a situation where I really had any kind of flexibility in terms of this of my schedule, which means that I never really had the flexibility of being able, for instance, of redoing a scene. It happened maybe in my whole film making career, like 2 or 3 times. I would just really not be happy with something. I would redo it, but I would redo it at the expense of something else. Meaning I redo it, but I drop something. I had to condense the shoot. It's not like I'm getting any additional day. Maybe on a couple of films I went over schedule, like a couple of days. Like for instance, when we were shooting Summer Hours, which was 31-day shoot. Obviously, the summer, the countryside, the sun was an important part of the film. I mean, there has been, it doesn't even, you can't even count in terms of days the sun we had during the whole shoot. You can count it in hours. I suppose that during the whole shoot we must have had something like 7 or 8 hours of actual sunshine, and we filmed during every single of those hours. But it was we were kind of desperate, because it was just the weather was so bad that we ended up having to shoot on a Sunday, because we knew that that specific Sunday morning was the only opportunity we would have to film that specific scene in the sunlight. But it was bad news in terms of our budget, because obviously shooting on Sundays is expensive. You sometimes you have a certain margin to adapt. But I really made most of my films on 30 day, 40. I mean, a movie like Something in the Air is more complicated, and it's closer to 40 days. I'm not sure how many, but I think something like 40 days. But it's a lot of sets, a lot of travels. It's a long film. It's a 2-hour film, so but I had the luxury of a longer shoot. But no, it was never. I never really could expand my schedules.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious about this sort of time pressure working against artistry.
It's sometimes you use it, sometimes it gives you specific energy. Like Carlos, we shot in 92 days. It's like shooting 3 movies back to back, each of them in 30 days, which is demented. I mean, because of the scope of the film, because of the action scenes. Before, it's just I don't know how we did. I have no plans to do it again.
Okay, we have time for one more question back there.
Hello, I have the question back to the screenplay. So, do you find that what kind of story or storyline is more easy to motivate you? And also, what is your working relationship with your other writers?
I write on my own mostly. I mean, there's only one of my films which I really seriously wrote with another screenwriter. That was Les Destinées Sentimentales. It's a period piece. It's adapted. It's adapted from a classic French novel, and we worked together. But it was my partner Jacques Fieschi who did most of the actual writing. But it was really not so much about inventing the film as to get as close as we could to the original novel. I mean, we did stick as faithfully as we could to the original screenplay. So it was a different form of writing. Otherwise, the only other movie where I shared the writing is Carlos. But Carlos, I wrote 98.5% of the film. I mean, there's other guys who signed it with me, but basically for contractual reasons. What I like about, it's not that I get interested with this or that story. What interests me is the creative process of the writing. I never start writing a film thinking, oh, this is a good idea, or this is. I start writing a film usually because I have no other idea. I don't know if it's good or bad, but there's no alternative really, and also because I have a sense that it's an interesting starting point, and maybe it will take me here or there, and I'm somehow curious of what will come out of it. But I don't know exactly what the film I start writing will become. But the only thing I know is that there must be a film there, because usually the moment when I sit down and start writing, it's because the idea has been coming back to me. It's been in the back of my mind for a while. I've been scribbling notes here and there, and it's I'm fairly confident there is kind of a movie behind those few vague ideas. But to me it's a discovery process.
Okay, before we go, I just wanted to, one last note is if you get a chance, please try and read some of the books that just came out by Olivier. He wrote a book called Post-May Adolescence, and it's appearing in an English translation for the first time, and it's a really amazing book. If you think he's a great filmmaker, he's just as amazing of a writer. And the other book is a collection of criticism of your films, edited by Kent Jones, and they're both really exceptional books. So I really encourage you to try and check those out if you can. And we'd just like to thank you so much for actually making it here. It took a little while, but you got here, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.